Chung, the Dutiful Daughter. Shimhyun, or Mr. Shim, was highly esteemed in the Korean village in which he resided. He belonged to the Yangban, or gentleman class, and when he walked forth it was with the stately swinging stride of the gentleman, while if he bestrode his favorite donkey, or was carried in his chair, a runner went ahead calling out to the commoners to clear the road. His rank was not high, and though greatly esteemed as a scholar, his income would scarcely allow of his taking the position he was fitted to occupy. His parents had been very fortunate in betrothing him to a remarkably beautiful and accomplished maiden, daughter of a neighboring gentleman. She was noted for beauty and grace, while her mental qualities were the subject of continual admiration. She could not only read and write her native Unmun, but was skilled in Chinese characters, while her embroidered shoes, pockets, and other feminine articles were the pride of her mother and friends. She had embroidered a set of historic panels, which her father sent to the king. His Majesty mentioned her skill with marked commendation, and had the panels made up into a screen, which for some time stood behind his mat, and continually called for his admiration. Shim had not seemed very demonstrative in regard to his approaching nuptials, but once he laid his eyes upon his betrothed, as she unveiled at the ceremony, he was completely captivated, and brooked with poor grace the formalities that had to be gone through before he could claim her as his constant companion. It was an exceptionally happy union, the pair being intellectually suited to each other, and each apparently possessing the bodily attributes necessary to charm the other. There was never a sign of disgust or disappointment at the choice their parents had made for them. They used to wander out into the little garden of the women's quarters and sit in the moonlight, planning for the future and enjoying the products of each other's well-stored mind. It was their pet desire to have a son, and all their plans seemed to center around this one ambition. The years came and went, however, but their coveted blessing was withheld. The wife consulted priestesses, and the husband, from long and great disappointment, grew sad at heart and cared but little for mingling with the world, which he thought regarded him with shame. He took to hooks and began to confine himself to his own apartments, letting his poor wife stay neglected and alone in the apartments of the women. From much study, lack of exercise, and failing appetite, he grew thin and emaciated, and his eyes began to show the wear of overwork and innutrition. The effect upon his wife was also bad, but with the woman's fortitude and patience, she bore up and hoped in spite of constant disappointment. She worried over her husband's condition and felt ashamed that she had no name in the world other than the wife of Shim, while she wished to be known as the mother of the Shim of whom they had both dreamed by day and by night till dreams had almost left them. After 15 years of childless waiting, the wife of Shim dreamed again. This time her vision was a brilliant one, and in it she saw a star come down to her from the skies above. The dream awakened her, and she sent for her husband to tell him that she knew their blessing was about to come to them. She was right, a child was given to them, but to their great dismay it was only a girl. Heaven had kindly prepared the way for the little visitor, however, for after 15 years' weary waiting, they were not going to look with serious disfavor upon a girl, however much their hopes had been placed upon the advent of a son. The child grew, and the parents were united as they only could be by such a precious bond. The ills of childhood seemed not to lack the little one. Even the virus of smallpox that was duly placed in her nostril failed to inoculate her, and her pretty skin remained fresh and soft like velvet, and totally free from the marks of the dread disease. At 3 years of age, she bade fair to far surpass her mother's noted beauty and accomplishments. Her cheeks were full-blown roses, and whenever she opened her dainty curved mouth, ripples of silvery laughter, or words of mature wisdom, were sure to be given forth. The hearts of the parents, that had previously been full of tears, were now light and full of contentment and joy. While they were constantly filled with pride by the reports of the wonderful wisdom of their child that continually came to them. The father forgot that his offspring was not a boy, and had his child continually by his side to guide his footsteps, as his feeble eyes refused to perform their office. Just as their joy seemed too great to be lasting, it was suddenly checked by the death of the mother, which plunged them into a deep grief from which the father emerged totally blind. It soon became a question as to where the daily food was to come from. Little by little, household trinkets were given to the brokers to dispose of, and in 10 years they had used up the homestead and all it contained. As his daughter was grown to womanhood, she could no longer direct his footsteps as he wandered out in the darkness of the blind. One day in his journeying, he fell into a deep ditch from which he could not extricate himself. After remaining in this deplorable condition for some time, he heard a step and called out for assistance, saying, "I am blind, not drunk." Whereupon the passing stranger said, "I know full well you are not drunk. True, you are blind, yet not incurably so." "Why, who are you that you know so much about me?" asked the blind man. "I am the old priest of the temple in the mountain fortress." "Well, what is this that you say about my not being permanently blind?" "I am a prophet, and I have had a vision concerning you. In case you make an offering of 300 bags of rice to the Buddha of our temple, you will be restored to sight, you will be given rank and dignity, while your daughter will become the first woman in all Korea." "But I am poor as well as blind," was the reply. "How can I promise such a princely offering?" "You may give me your order for it, and pay it along as you are able," said the priest. "Very well, give me pencil and paper." Whereupon they retired to a house, and the blind man gave his order for the costly price of his sight. Returning home weary, bruised, and hungry, he smiled to himself in spite of his ill condition, at the thought of his giving an order for so much rice when he had not a grain of it to eat. He obtained finally a little work in pounding rice in the stone mortars. It was hard labor for one who had lived as he had done, but it kept them from starving, and his daughter prepared his food for him as nicely as she knew how. One night, as the dinner was spread on the little, low table before him, sitting on the floor, the priest came and demanded his pay. The old blind man lost his appetite for his dinner and refused to eat. He had to explain to his daughter the compact he had made with the priest, and while she was filled with grief and dismayed at the enormity of the price, she yet seemed to have some hope that it might be accomplished and his sight restored. That night, after her midnight bath, she lay down on a mat in the open air and gazed up to heaven, to which she prayed that her poor father might be restored to health and sight. While thus engaged, she fell asleep and dreamed that her mother came down from heaven to comfort her and told her not to worry, that a means would be found for the payment of the rice, and that soon all would be happy again in the little family. The next day she chanced to hear of the wants of a great merchant who sailed in its large boats to China for trade, but was greatly distressed by an evil spirit that lived in the water, through which he must pass. For some time, it was stated, he had not been able to take his boats over this dangerous place, and his loss therefrom was very great. At last, it was reported that he was willing and anxious to appease the spirit by making the offering the wise men had deemed necessary. Priests had told him that the sacrifice of a young maiden to the spirit would quiet it and remove the trouble. He was, therefore, anxious to find the proper person and had offered a great sum to obtain such an one. Chung, hearing of this, decided that it must be the fulfillment of her dream, and having determined to go and offer herself, she put on old clothes and fasted while journeying, that she might look wan and haggard like one in mourning. She had previously prepared food for her father, and explained to him that she wished to go and bow at her mother's grave in return to her for having appeared to her in a dream. When the merchant saw the applicant, he was at once struck with her beauty and dignity of carriage, in spite of her attempt to disguise herself. He said that it was not in his heart to kill people, especially maidens of such worth as she seemed to be. He advised her not to apply, but she told her story and said she would give herself for the 300 bags of rice. "Ah, now I see the true nobility of your character. I did not know that such filial piety existed outside the works of the ancients. I will send to my master and secure the rice," said the man, who happened to be but an overseer for a greater merchant. She got the rice and took it to the priest in a long procession of 150 ponies, each laboring under 2 heavy bags. The debt cancelled and her doom fixed, she felt the relaxation and grief necessarily consequent upon such a condition. She could not explain to her father. She mourned over the loneliness that would come to him after she was gone, and wondered how he would support himself after she was removed and until his sight should be restored. "I am only 14 years old and have but 4 more hours to live. What will become of my poor father? Oh, who will care for him? Kind heaven, protect him when I am gone." Wild with grief, she went and sat on her father's knee, but could not control her sobs and tears. Whereupon he asked her what the trouble could be. Having made up her mind that the time had gone, and that the deed was done and could not be remedied, she decided to tell him and tried to break it gently. But when the whole truth dawned upon the poor old man, it nearly killed him. He clasped her close to his bosom and crying, "My child, my daughter, my only comfort, I will not let you go. What will eyes be to me if I can no longer look upon your lovely face?" They mingled their tears and sobs, and the neighbors, hearing the commotion in the usually quiet hut, came to see what was the trouble. Chung begged them to come and care for the old man when she could look after him no more, and they agreed to do so. While the wailing and heartbreaking was going on, a stranger rode up on a donkey and asked for the Shim family. He came just in time to see what the act was costing the poor people. He comforted the girl by giving her a check for 50 bags of rice for the support of the father when his daughter should be no more. She took it gratefully and gave it to the neighbors to keep in trust. She then prepared herself, took a last farewell, and left her fainting father to go to her bed in the sea. In due time, the boat that bore Chung, at the head of a procession of boats, arrived at the place where the evil spirit reigned. She was dressed in bridal garments furnished by the merchant. On her arrival at the place, the kind merchant tried once more to appease the spirit by an offering of eatables, but it was useless, whereupon Chung prayed to heaven, bade them all goodbye, and leaped into the sea. Above, all was quiet, the waves subsided, the sea became like a lake, and the boats passed on their way unmolested. When Simchang regained her consciousness, she was seated in a little boat drawn by fishes, and pretty maidens were giving her to drink from a carved jade bottle. She asked them who they were and where she was going. They answered, "We are servants of the King of the Sea, and we are taking you to his palace." Simchang wondered if this was death and thought it very pleasant if it were. They passed through forests of waving plants and saw great lazy fish feeding about in the water, till at last they reached the confines of the palace. Her amazement was then unbounded, for the massive walls were composed of precious stones, such as she had only heretofore seen used as ornaments. Pearls were used to cover the heads of nails in the great doors through which they passed, and everywhere they seemed a most costly and lavish display of the precious gems and metals, while the walks were made of polished black marble that shone in the water. The light, as it passed through the water, seemed to form most beautifully colored clouds, and the rainbow colors were everywhere disporting themselves. Soon a mighty noise was heard, and they moved aside, while the king passed by preceded by an army with gaily colored and beautifully embroidered satin banners, each bearer blowing on an enormous shell. The king was borne in a golden chair on the shoulders of 100 men, followed by 100 musicians and as many more beautiful dancing girls, with wonderful head-dresses and rich costumes. Simchang objected to going before such an august king, but she was assured of kind treatment, and after being properly dressed by the sea maids, in garments suitable for the palace of the sea king, she was borne in a chair on the shoulders of eunuchs to the king's apartments. The king treated her with great respect, and all the maidens and eunuchs bowed before her. She protested that she was not worthy of such attention. "I am," she said, "but the daughter of a beggar, for whom thought I was giving my life when rescued by these maidens. I am in no way worthy of your respect." The king smiled a little and said, "Ah, I know more of you than you know of yourself. You must know that I am the Sea King, and that we know full well the doings of the stars which shine in the heaven above, for they continually visit us on light evenings." "Well, you were once a star. Many say a beautiful one, for you had many admirers. You favored one star more than the others, and in your attentions to him, you abused your office as cupbearer to the King of Heaven, and let your lover have free access to all of the choice wines of the palace. In this way, before you were aware of it, the peculiar and choice brands that the king especially liked were consumed, and upon examination, your fault became known. As punishment, the king decided to banish you to earth, but fearing to send you both at once, lest you might be drawn together there, he sent your lover first, and after keeping you in prison for a long time, you were sent as a daughter to your former lover. He is the man you claim as father. Heaven has seen your filial piety, however, and repents. You will be hereafter most highly favored as a reward for your dutiful conduct." He then sent her to fine apartments prepared for her, where she was to rest and recuperate before going back to earth. After a due period of waiting and feasting on royal food, Simchang's beauty was more than restored. She had developed into a complete woman, and her beauty was dazzling. Her cheeks seemed colored by the beautiful tints of the waters through which she moved with ease and comfort, while her mind blossomed forth like a flower in the rare society of the Sea King and his peculiarly gifted people. When the proper time arrived for her departure for the world she had left, a large and beautiful flower was brought into her chamber. It was so arranged that Simchang could conceal herself inside of it, while the delicious perfume and the juice of the plant were ample nourishment. When she had bidden good fate to her peculiar friends and taken her place inside the flower, it was conveyed to the surface of the sea, at the place where she had plunged in. She had not waited long in this strange position before a boat bore in it. It proved to be the vessel of her friend the merchant. As he drew near his old place of danger, he marveled much at sight of such a beautiful plant, growing and blossoming in such a strange place, where once only evil was to be expected. He was also well nigh intoxicated by the powerful perfume exhaled from the plant. Steering close, he managed to secure the flower and place it safely in his boat, congratulated himself on securing so valuable and curious a present for his king. For he decided at once to present it at the palace if he could succeed in getting it safely there. The plan succeeded. The strange plant with its stranger tenant was duly presented to His Majesty, who was delighted with the gift, and spent his time gazing upon it to the exclusion of state business. He had a glass house prepared for it in an inner court, and seemed never to tire of watching his new treasure. At night, when all was quiet, Chung was wont to come forth and rest herself by walking in the moonlight. But on one occasion, the king, being indisposed and restless, thought he would go to breathe the rich perfume of the strange flower and rest himself. In this way, he chanced to see Chung before she could conceal herself, and of course his surprise was unbounded. He accosted her, not without fear, demanding who she might be. She, being also afraid, took refuge in her flower, when to the amazement of both, the flower vanished, leaving her standing alone where it had been but a moment before. The king was about to flee at this point, but she called to him not to fear, that she was but a human being, and no spirit as he doubtless supposed. The king drew near, and was at once lost in admiration of her matchless beauty, when a great noise was heard outside, and eunuchs came, stating that all the generals with the heads of departments were asking for an audience on very important business. His Majesty very reluctantly went to see what it all meant. An officer versed in astronomy stated that they had, on the previous night, observed a brilliant star descend from heaven and alight upon the palace, and that they believed it boded good to the royal family. Then the king told of the flower and the wonderful apparition he had seen in the divine maiden. It so happened that the queen was deceased, and it was soon decided that the king should take this remarkable maiden for his wife. The marriage was announced and preparations all made. As the lady was without parents supposedly, the ceremony took place at the royal wedding hall and was an occasion of great state. Never was man more charmed by woman than in this case. The king would not leave her by day or night, and the business of state was almost totally neglected. At last, Chung chided her husband, telling him it was not manly for the king to spend all his time in the women's quarters. That if he cared so little for the role as to neglect it altogether, others might find occasion to usurp his place. She enjoined upon him the necessity of giving the days to his business, and being content to spend the nights with her. He saw her wisdom and remarked upon it, promising to abide by her advice. After some time spent in such luxury, Chung became lonely and mourned for her poor father, but despaired for being able to see him. She knew not if he were alive or dead, and the more she thought of it, the more she mourned, till tears were in her heart continually, and not infrequently overflowed from her beautiful eyes. The king chanced to see her weeping, and was solicitous to know the cause of her sorrow, whereupon she answered that she was oppressed by a strange dream concerning a poor blind man, and was desirous of alleviating in some way the sufferings of the many blind men in the country. Again, the king marveled at her great heart and offered to do anything towards carrying out her noble purpose. Together they agreed that they would summon all the blind men of the country to a great feast, at which they should be properly clothed, amply fed, and treated each to a present of cash. The edict was issued, and on the day appointed for the feast, the queen secreted herself in a pavilion, from which she could look down and fully observe the strange assembly. Watched the first day, but saw no one who resembled her lost parent. Again the second day, she held her earnest vigil, but in vain. She was about to give up her quest as useless and mourn over the loss of her father, when, as the feast was closing on the third day, a feeble old man in rags came tottering up. The attendants, having served so many, were treating this poor fellow with neglect, and were about to drive him away as too late when the queen ordered them whipped and the old man properly fed. He seemed well nigh starved, and grasped at the food set before him with the eagerness of an animal. There seemed to be something about this forlorn creature that arrested and engaged the attention of the queen, and the attendants, noticing this, were careful to clothe him with extra care. When sufficient time had elapsed for the satisfying of his hunger, he was ordered brought to the queen's pavilion, where her majesty scrutinized him closely for a few moments, and then, to the surprise and dismay of all her attendants, she screamed, "My father! My father!" and fell at his feet senseless. Her maids hurried off to tell the king of the strange conduct of their mistress, and he came to see for himself. By rubbing her limbs and applying strong-smelling medicines to her nostrils, the fainting queen was restored to consciousness and allowed to tell her peculiar and interesting story. But the poor old blind man could barely collect his senses sufficiently to grasp the situation. As the full truth began to dawn upon him, he cried, "Oh, my child, can the dead come back to us? I hear your voice, I feel your form, but how can I know it is you, for I have no eyes? Away with these sightless orbs." And he tore at his eyes with his nails, when to his utter amazement and joy, the scales fell away, and he stood rejoicing in his sight once more. His Majesty was overjoyed to have his lovely queen restored to her wonted happy frame of mind. He made the old man an officer of high rank, appointed him a fine house, and had him married to the accomplished daughter of an officer of suitable rank, thereby fulfilling the last of the prophecy of both the aged priest and the king of the sea.